What's up, and welcome to Complete Nonsense, where we take the latest news and trends and show you kind of the money side of it. We're your host. I'm Ben Richardson, coming to you from North Carolina, and with me is my friend and co-host Lindsay DeMuno, coming to you from Boston. And with us today is special guest and senior industry analyst Ted Rossman. Ted, we're so excited to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to this conversation. We've got new episodes coming out every single week, so be sure to like, share, and subscribe from whatever platform you're watching on. Lindsay, go ahead and tell everybody what we've got in store today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. We're going to be talking about retail credit cards, how to leverage credit card rewards and points around the holidays, and sports betting and the risks many consumers take. All right, Ted. So let's start with retail credit cards. I'm going to come out swinging here, pun intended for later, but are they good? Are they bad? Give us all the details.
You know, my favorite saying about credit cards, which I didn't make up, but we can give me credit for it anyway. But credit cards are like power tools. They can be really useful or they can be dangerous. It's all about how you use them. And I think that's especially true with retail cards because many of them charge 30% or more, which is just a staggeringly high interest rate. We definitely don't want you paying that. Honestly, rates are high for all cards. The average is about 21%. But for store cards, it could be 10 points more than that. So if you ever carry a balance, a store card is probably not for you. That said, there are some instances in which they can work. Start by paying in full and avoiding interest. If it's a store that you're loyal to, like if you really like Amazon or Target or Best Buy, they all have credit cards that give 5% back when you use their card at their store. So that could be worth it.
But what you're saying though is responsibility is kind of key here when you're coming to retail credit cards, right?
It's so true. Yeah. I mean, that's really true of all cards. I mean, you could say the same thing about a
Correct.
general purpose travel card or cashback card. You don't want to pay 20 or 30% in interest just to get 1 or 2 or even 5 or 6% in cashback or airline miles. I think what's also unique to store cards is that pressure that sometimes happens where
Yes.
you're at the checkout counter and the cashier is asking you, hey, do you want to sign up for this product to save 10% on your purchase? You may not even realize right away that that's a credit card. And
I'm guilty of that.
You're guilty, Lindsay. Did you do it?
That happened to me. I was at Bloomingdale's. This was over a year ago, and I was buying a dress for a wedding. And I went to the checkout, and the cashier was like, do you want to save 20%? And I'm like, yeah. So she's like,
who doesn't?
Enter in your name and email. So I do. And then it prompts me to keep going. And I'm just like thinking in my head, I don't know what's happening. And then it asked for my social security number. And I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm signing up for a card. But at that point, I'm in too deep. So I just signed up for the card and I used it, got the 20%, and I still have it.
Were you were able to pay it off responsibly?
I paid it off responsibly. Good. As soon as I got the bill, I paid it off.
So that's one of the questions I had for you, Ted. So like, I think a lot of times, there are those like sensations where you're like buyer beware. You feel kind of like concerned or you feel that pressure. And I'm horrible when it comes to pressure, especially because I'm like, are you getting like a Christmas bonus if I sign up? Because I'd love to help you. And so I kind of like feel guilty. But, what are some of the benefits that like stores and things that show with these credit cards? Like what are actual some of the benefits of retail cards?
There's the sign-up bonus, which Lindsay mentioned. Sometimes that can be worth it. I have a different coworker who told me a story about how he saved like $1,000 on new appliances by signing up for the right credit card. I probably wouldn't sign up if it's 10% off a $100 purchase. That's just not going to move the needle. Mm-hmm. And there are credit consequences, obviously, to signing up for cards. But I mean, hey, if the sign-up bonus is worth it, or if you're loyal to the store and you buy a lot from a store that's going to give you 5% back on everything you buy, those are a couple instances when it would make sense. Again, provided you're avoiding these high interest rates.
Yeah. Well, I always wondered, like, because I knew that, there's credit cards, there's like kind of your general credit cards, then you have retail credit cards. And I guess as a consumer, I was always curious, like, is there a benefit to the retailer who are doing these credit cards through? Like, is that one of the reasons they're pushed through retail shopping and things like that?
These are huge moneymakers for the stores. Yeah,
Okay.
Macy's reportedly makes about half of its overall profit from credit cards, which I think
Oh,
is just
wow.
staggering.
Wow.
I mean, it's almost like a credit card company masquerading as a retailer sometimes. Yeah, there can be major benefits. You could say that about the airlines too. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking multi-billion-dollar partnerships. It really is big business. The dollars and cents for the retailer include things like getting a finder's fee from the card issuer
Mm.
for bringing in business. They save on the interchange fees, the processing
Yeah.
fees that retailers always complain about paying to the card companies. That doesn't
Mhm.
apply at
Yeah.
all, or at least not as much if it's their own card. Sometimes they even share in some of the revenue from interest and fees. They're big money makers.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that same vein, you mentioned that it's perks for the retailer, but what happens when the retailer closes the store, like a Sears or a
Mm,
J.C. Penney? What happens to your card then if you've opened one?
Yeah, it's a good question. There have been a number of high profile bankruptcies in recent years.
yeah.
Unfortunately, the debt typically stays with you in
Mm,
large part because
Mm.
of your agreement with the bank. So it's really the underlying bank that is the
gotcha.
creditor here. So
Right.
it's not a get out of jail free card if the store goes out of business. You typically still need to pay that amount.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like you'd have a lot of consumers wishing for bankrupt companies if that was the case. I guess kind of even on the other side of that, you talked a little bit about the benefit of those cards, and I would say, what are some of the questions that I should be keeping in mind, like before opening a retail card? Like for myself as a consumer, what are the things that I should be playing through my head? I think you mentioned one of them about like, is it even worth it? You mentioned like the 10% on $100. Like, are there any other questions I should consider as a consumer before opening a retail credit card?
The biggest one is whether or not you carry a balance. If you're ever going to carry a balance, it's probably not the right product for you.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think loyalty really matters and the size of the purchase, especially for that initial discount. We don't want to sign up for too many credit cards. There are
Yeah.
impacts to your credit score in terms of hard inquiries when you apply for products, lowering the average age of your accounts when you open a new
Yeah.
card. I mean, I think it's totally fine to open a new card from time to time. Like I generally advise people once or twice a year, take a look around, see if you want to open a new card, but it might not be the store
Yeah.
card. I mean, it might
Yeah.
be more of a general purpose cashback card or travel card.
Yeah.
In other words, we don't want to run up a whole bunch of applications all at once. So don't
Yeah.
waste it on something that you're not going to use and benefit from in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
That's
when it starts hitting your credit, that you're inquiring about all these credit card applications, it certainly is not a huge help on your credit report as well. I guess going back to one question that you had kind of talked a little bit about earlier was some of the benefits, that you can get. And I know there's been a lot of conversations. I've seen it in the news about the Credit Card Competition Act. Like, what do we know at this point about how that could potentially impact retail credit cards? Is there
Mm.
risk because there's these rewards that come with it, the sign up bonuses if you do it? Like how does that come into play? Do we have enough insight there right now to share with consumers about how that could potentially impact retail credit cards?
Merchants and card companies have been fighting for years about these interchange fees, the processing fee that amounts to about 2.2%
Yeah.
that the retailer pays the card company every time we use the card. And that's actually a huge funder of rewards. So that's where I'm actually against this credit card competition act. I
Yeah.
think it's shrewd politics, to be honest, that like on the face of it, who doesn't like competition, right?
Right.
And retailers talk about, oh, we'll lower prices. I'll call foul on that because debit card interchange was capped more than a decade ago.
Oh,
And
okay.
retailers said they would lower prices, but they didn't. The
Yeah.
Federal Reserve found only 1% did. So, on the face of it, this rule is about promoting competition. It's about having at least two networks enabled on every
Mm.
transaction, and merchants can pick. I think in the long run, it would cost us rewards. It would potentially hurt data security because we don't know who these new kind of fly by night competitors may be.
Yeah.
I think this is something that sounds better than it really is. But
Yeah.
I think it's part of a larger flashpoint that retailers don't like these fees. They've been pursuing other
Mm.
avenues like lawsuits to get them reduced. I tend to think it's a necessary cost of doing business. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that it's just something that in the long run, card usage brings more benefits to retailers, in my view. One other thought on store cards specifically is I feel like the buy now, pay later industry, companies like Affirm and Afterpay, I
Yeah.
feel like they've been really cutting into the store card revenue model in recent years, especially online. So I think that's
Yeah.
another thing that some of these retailers are concerned about.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Well, yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead,
guys.
Lindsay.
I've seen that a lot recently with just online shopping in general, the buy now, pay later. Can you talk a little bit about the risks of the buy now, pay later trend that's been um happening lately?
I think the biggest risk is that it's still debt. I think it doesn't feel that way
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're at checkout, often online, and it doesn't feel like a $200 purchase anymore because it's just 4 easy installments of $50. And
Mm.
maybe there's not
Yeah.
even interest associated with that. It's kind of like a new twist on the old layaway or infomercial
Mm.
kind of
Yeah.
thing that, 4 easy payments of 19.99 and it could be yours. It's still
Damn
debt.
wow.
I think what people get into trouble with is when they stack a bunch of these. So
Yeah.
it's maybe not just the one that's a big deal, but you may have 4, 5, 6, or more running at the same time. That's when I think you could overspend and run into trouble.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you say that because I think we all have this kind of like instant gratification monkey on our shoulders. And sometimes we get into that purchase and it feels good in the moment. I only spent $50 rather than 200 up front. But I will tell you as a consumer who's done that before, when I have to make those 3 other payments later, it's not as fun anymore. All of a sudden I'm like, oh man, I forgot I still have to pay these. And I think that's where honestly a lot of buyers can get in trouble because they kind of commit to these things. And if you're really not structured or you haven't budgeted appropriately, it really becomes problematic, really for the consumer. So I personally took a credit card or a retail card out like several years ago. I needed to make a furniture purchase. The furniture was expensive. We were planning to pay cash, but we were able to find a retail card that had 0% interest for several years. And because of that, we were actually able to free up our cash and invest our cash and keep a low monthly payment. And it actually was more favorable in that way. So I certainly understanding the perks and the benefits. I've been a beneficiary of them. But again, I always go back to your point, Ted, that you made is like, do it responsibly. If you can pay it off
Mhm.
and you're not penalized with accruing interest, certainly a better way to approach retail cards.
I'm glad you brought up the 0% promotion because one more thing that consumers should be aware of is that a lot of times when stores have 0% credit card promotions, they're what's known as deferred interest, which means if you don't pay in full, by the time the clock runs out, they go back and they charge you all of the interest that would have accumulated on your average daily balance that whole time. Deferred interest, I think, is a nasty tactic that rarely, if ever, shows up on bank cards that have
Oh yeah.
0% promos, but a lot of stores do it. And what it means is that even if there's $1 left at the end, they charge you all of the interest that would have accumulated on that full
Yeah.
amount. So that can be a big gotcha.
Yeah. Well, I guess one thing I know that we had a recent survey that had gone out that 43% of credit card holders do not know all the interest rates on their card that carry balances month to month. I mean, that was like kind of concerning to hear that stat because like that's a large majority of Americans who don't know the interest that they're carrying, which means there's a lot of benefit to the credit card companies, but to everyday people, that's certainly impacting their wallets. I mean, what's your thoughts there?
Credit card debt is hard to talk about. We did a study once and we found that people would rather talk about their weight, their political views, their religious views. They'd rather talk about almost everything else. I think the only thing that was more taboo was your dating life, but I think everything else we'd rather share that than our credit card debt.
Yeah, it's
And
true.
I think that it's just out of sight, out of mind for some people.
Yeah,
You do need to attack it head on, though. It's probably
yeah,
your highest cost debt by a wide margin. You need to come up with a plan, whether it's a 0% balance transfer or working with a reputable nonprofit credit counseling agency,
yeah,
taking on a side hustle or cutting your expenses or whatever it is. It gets back to
yeah,
that idea that credit cards can work for you or against you. If you're
yeah.
among those who are paying in full, rewards are great, but it's not fun to be trapped in a 20% debt cycle.
Yeah, 100%. Well,
Definitely.
you talked about credit card, like they can work for you. So I want to talk a little bit about that, like credit cards that work for you. We talk about rewards and points. We got the holidays coming up. So let's talk a little bit about how like consumers can leverage credit card points. Long ago, I heard you talk about this. You may even have written an article about this, but you talked about kind of reward stacking. And I was really intrigued by that concept. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
When we talk about stacking discounts, we're talking about combining multiple savings tactics on the same purchase. So a store promotion, those are easy to find. I think it's going to be a great season for discounts. In fact, a lot of the best deals kicked off in early October, and they're just going to continue right through. So combine your store promo with a rewards credit card that you hopefully pay in full and avoid interest. And then also consider maybe a third way to save on that same purchase would be go through an online shopping portal like Rakuten or Shop Through Chase, or a lot of the big airlines have these. It's affiliate marketing, basically. You
Yeah.
log into this platform, or maybe you have a browser extension, and then they give you a kickback, kind of a finder's fee, some extra cash back or airline miles. You could potentially combine all three of those on the same
Yeah.
purchase.
See, that's so intriguing to me because I remember hearing, I think there was a big trend for a long time about couponing. I don't know if you remember these trends where people are like going and buying $150 worth of groceries and paying like $4 because they were able to double up on coupons. But it's kind of a similar concept with cards. You're learning new ways to navigate. So I love that concept. I think that's helpful for consumers, and especially as we approach the holidays. And I know a lot of wallets are getting a little bit tighter around this time of year. I love that kind of advice there. So thank you for sharing that, Ted.
Yeah.
Of course.
For someone that's maybe new to credit cards, how should they decide if they should open a card that's cash back or maybe one that favors points and miles?
Cashback is Americans' favorite credit card reward. It's also my favorite
Interesting.
personally, so I could speak to that.
Same.
I think it's
Me
very
too.
simple and universal. For me, I mean, I travel some, but it's not a real big passion of mine. I have two young kids. For me, it's more about getting 6% back at the grocery store and getting
Yeah.
3% back
Yeah.
on dining and 3% back on gas. And
Yeah.
I think it's this kind of everyday value. Travel rewards can be great too. I'll tell you, they're potentially more lucrative, but they're also more work where you need to compare the best deals and understand the programs and maybe have the flexibility to travel on the optimal dates. But we've actually found by far cashback is Americans' favorite. And I think that's especially relevant now with
Yeah.
prices being so high. Like,
For sure.
Yeah.
take that 6% grocery card. Everybody's grocery bill has gone up. If you've been paying with a debit card and now you switch over to a 6% cashback
Yeah.
credit card, and you pay it off right away and you avoid interest, you've just lowered your grocery bill by 6%. I mean, that
Yeah.
could be
Wow.
hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars throughout the year.
Yeah. That's actually a
Yeah.
good thought. And you think about that compounding cost because it's not just a one-time cost. It's the recurring as you do it, month over month, what you're actually saving over the years. It can be very substantial. I'm interested, Ted, do we know? I got to believe there's a lot of unused points and rewards out there, whether it's cash back or travel points. Do we have any inkling of like how much unused points and rewards there are, like year over year, month over month, anything like that?
We found that about a quarter of rewards cardholders didn't redeem any rewards over the past year. So that's
Wow.
especially disappointing to me because this is
Yeah.
free money. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. You could say the same thing about gift cards, actually. We found
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
half of Americans are sitting on unused gift cards. The average value is about $200. So build that into your holiday shopping strategy as well. But back to airline miles, hotel points, credit card rewards. These are real value. You might as well use them.
Yeah.
They're not going to get
Yeah.
more valuable over time. Honestly, they tend to lose a little value because the flight that maybe cost 50,000 miles this year might cost 60,000 in a year or two because of program changes. So I think it's really important, as they say in the points and miles world, to earn and burn strategically. Like you want to
Yeah.
actually use them.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I found a lot of gift cards recently. I went through. I don't know if you guys. I don't know if it's popular in every American household to have a junk drawer. Do y'all have a junk
Yes.
drawer? Okay, so it's not just me. I went through my junk drawer. I actually found almost $243 worth of gift cards that still activated, still there, and they've just been sitting there. I mean, they're things for movie passes, all these things, and I'm like, this is real money. And so to your point, Ted, like that gift cards are real money too. And so I think that's a very fascinating point.
Do the gift cards or credit cards rewards ever expire? I know, like you said, Ted, that the points and miles might not be worth the same as they would a year later, but does your cash back go away if you've accumulated like $1,000 in cash back?
There have been improvements in recent years, especially with gift cards and travel. Cashback rarely, if ever, expires as long as you're in good standing with the card issuer. That
Yeah.
said, though, there's really no benefit to stacking it up. You might as well redeem
Mhm.
sooner. I think the main time to hoard rewards is if you have a specific trip in mind, like you really want
Yeah.
those 100,000 points to
Yep.
fly first class to Asia and back or something. Cashback, I would typically advise cashing in every month just because you might as well get it while you can. Gift cards can't expire for at least 5 years. Many stores have done away with expirations entirely, although they can charge inactivity fees after a year of non-use. So that's
Yeah.
something to be aware of. Expirations have gotten a little better with airline and hotel rewards programs, but that's one that can snag people. Often, if you go a year or two
Yeah.
without any program activity, you can lose your points or miles. A good tip there, if you don't have a trip planned in the future, is oftentimes any sort of qualifying activity will keep them going and it'll actually
Oh, yeah.
reset the clock. So, you could
Mm.
make a small purchase through the airline shopping portal, maybe something you would have bought anyway,
Hmm.
and that could restart the clock. Or you could donate some of your miles to charity and that resets the clock. So any sort of qualifying activity can restart you.
Now, so when it comes to like credit cards, Ted, you mentioned you like the cashback feature. That's one that's the reward. That's one of your favorites, Lindsay. I think you mentioned that. Do either one of y'all currently leverage points for like holiday travel, anything like that? Like, do you use points for travel around the holidays? Is that something that y'all personally use?
Not personally. I use cash back more because I'll use it to pay for like a flight when I need to go home or a train
Yeah, yeah.
ticket, and I'll use it for my holiday shopping. But I have not used points and miles yet. I need to open a card that
I'm
favors
still
points
blown
and
away
miles.
that I'm still not used to train as being a normal way of transportation. We don't have that where I am. So I'm still blown away when you mentioned that. But Ted, what about you? You're saying use cash back and we'll do the same kind of with booking flights, anything like that?
I tend to be a cashback loyalist. Yeah. In fact, I'm on track to make about $2,000 in cashback rewards this year. So back to that idea that it's free money for money you would have spent anyway. So I tend to redeem that in drips and drabs every month. I've dabbled a little bit with travel cards. Ironically, I took the plunge just prior to the pandemic, so we know how well
Yeah.
that worked out.
Yeah.
I went back to my cashback roots after that. I do use airline loyalty programs, and through personal or business travel have sometimes accumulated enough for a free trip, but cashback really tends to be my jam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How
That's
about you,
it.
Ben?
Yeah, I tell you what, I don't travel a lot for the holidays. Thankfully, so most of my family's local, so I'll use cards. I'll get cash back, whether it's, filling up the gas tank, stuff like that. Just, very, very subtle things. But yeah, I'm more of a cashback person myself. So definitely I'm prepared for the holidays. I like to get my cash back. We just had Amazon Prime just had their second Prime Day. I'm pretty sure my wallet's completely empty after that. So, but on the same side, I got some early holiday shopping done, so I do feel good about that.
Speaking of empty wallets, I want to shift gears a little bit to sports betting. We've got the World Series coming up. Do you guys have a favorite team before we dive into the credit card conversation on who you think is going to win the
I
World
really wish you
Series?
didn't bring up this topic because my team is out. I was an Atlanta Braves fan. We had a great season, but we didn't make it. We didn't make it past the Phillies. So I don't really have a dog in the fight anymore. But Ted, I don't know if you have one you're following there.
I'm a big sports fan. You can see my Coors Field picture here.
Yeah,
Sadly, the
yeah, yeah,
Rockies won't be in the World Series this year. I think the Phillies are going to win. I don't
yeah,
necessarily have a team that I'm pulling for, but
yeah.
I
They're red
like the
hot right now.
chances.
Yeah, they
Did,
they look good right now for sure.
oh, did you know a fun fact about the Phillies is the last time they won the World Series in 2008? That's when the Great Recession hit. So there's a Phillies curse with the
Oh,
recessions.
I did not know that. So does that are we officially in a recession? I probably should have asked Sarah Foster in our last episode if this is officially marked a recession. But I will say if we just focus on the sports, that I think they came red hot at the right time. But when you talk about sports betting, I read an article recently. Maybe I was on TikTok, but I saw something around where there were some people who had been using credit cards for sports betting. Now, I don't assume everybody does that, but at least some people had been using credit cards. And Ted, I'm curious from your standpoint. I mean, that's got to be a high risk, right?
Very high risk. Yeah. I would definitely steer clear of using a credit card for sports betting for a few reasons. I mean, one, obviously you could lose money and you could get into trouble. There's also the fact that a lot of states will not even allow credit
Hmm.
cards to be used for sports betting, or sometimes
Yeah.
the providers or the banks themselves will prohibit that. But if they allow it, there's a good chance it'll be charged cash advance fees because it's a cash like transaction.
Yeah.
So cash advances, kind of like putting your credit card into an ATM and taking money out. There's a fee, something like 3 or 5%
Yeah.
associated with that, depending on the bank. Also, there's a higher than usual interest rate, often close to 30%, that starts
Wow.
accruing immediately. So
Yeah.
cash advances in general should be avoided. And that applies to sports betting. If you are going to do it, certainly don't put in more than you can afford to lose. And it's safer to fund that account with a debit card or a bank
Yeah.
transfer.
Something you
Yeah.
have cash ready for. Yeah. Cause I
Yeah.
was thinking, I mean, and I know sports betting is not legal in every state either. I think it was Legal Sports Report said that I think it was 25 states, plus Washington, D.C. have legalized online betting. So just very, very interesting, about that. I was just very surprised to know that there were people that had actually used credit cards. I would already think it's high risk. It's kind of like playing the lottery in my mind,
Yeah.
at least if you're not well informed on the sports side. So.
Are there any general pros or cons to using a credit card for sports betting? I know there's pros, obviously, if you pay off in full, but what are the cons there?
This is one instance when I wouldn't use credit cards,
Mm.
really because of the cash advance fees and also for the potential for overspending. I think it's important, if you're somebody who's considering sports betting, view it as entertainment, not as a get rich quick kind of scheme.
Yeah.
So only
Yeah.
put in money that you can afford to lose, kind of like money that you might be spending to get together with friends or something like that. I think it's an entertainment expense, not an investment opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I mean, I was thinking about, I was trying to think in my mind, Lindsay, about like pros and cons. And I was like, oh, maybe it's because your transactions could be secure or like it's easy to use.
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't affect your regular cash flow. But then I'm like on the con side of it, like I feel like it far outweighs, what those ease of things are. And I think, Ted, you're spot on, is like, use the funds you have available, be responsible with it. And probably just not the best place to be jumping into the credit card arena. So I think that's I think it's a really interesting point around October. This is Major League Baseball's big time of year. You got football's in full swing. So sports betting is definitely a big thing. So I think any advice we can give for people to be responsible is certainly helpful there.
How much is spent on sports betting annually? Do either of you know?
I want to say sportsbook revenue hit like a record of like 7.5 billion in 2022, I think, according to the American Gambling Association. So there's a lot of money in it. So don't get me wrong. It's a big industry. It's a growing industry. I think you can look back over the last 5 years or so and just see the growth in states that have started accepting it. I don't know if that has to do with revenue sharing by state. I don't know how that works, but it's certainly a big revenue driver in the United States. But again, not legal in all states yet. I think I heard that some of the states that were the latest to launch, I believe, was Kentucky, and then North Carolina and Vermont are suspected to be next, but all still to be determined.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I think this has been really helpful, Ted. I want to thank you for coming on with us. Like, this is really insightful stuff. You're clearly, a step above the rest in understanding this stuff. So I appreciate you investing into us. I've taken some notes here today, actually, things I need to do based on some of what you've taught. But I want to thank you for giving us a few minutes of your time, and we absolutely look forward to having you on with us again, hopefully here in the near future.
Me too. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe from whatever platform you're having. And we will definitely look forward to seeing you next week. Lindsay, do you want to share real quickly what we've got in store for next week?
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of you in the housing market, we're going to be chatting with Bankrate's principal writer, Jeff Ostrowski, about the 2024 outlook, the latest retirement trend, which is on a cruise ship, and the impact of extreme weather on house hunting.
Who doesn't want to retire on a cruise ship, right?
I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
It will be a fun conversation. We look forward to seeing you all next week, and have a great day.